Let's recap a moment what we've gathered so far. We've gathered that there's something called the Havas Misoteres, this innate, dormant love that every single Jew has, and that is within the Chachma, the sphere, the soul power of Chachma that's within one's soul. And that is the sphere that is most open to the blessed infinite light, because Chachma, Koachma, wisdom is a state of open expansiveness, and that openness allows it to be a place where infinity can flow through. So we've also established that what is this phenomenon? Called someone who doesn't even value Judaism. Judaism is not their set of values. In fact, they're even against it. When asked to convert or die, countless times throughout history, individuals have said, die. Like, where does that come from? Like, why are they giving up their life for something that seemingly they were not living as their value system? And so this phenomenon we're explaining is the Havas Misoteres, this dormant innate love that the soul has for God. And just like the body has self-preservation techniques, so does the soul. When the soul says, oh my God, that's actually going to disconnect me from God, that red line has been crossed. That spiritual adrenaline kicks in and says, no way, I am not going to sever my soul from its source. So what we want to do, and what we're on the journey of understanding, is how do I get that spiritual adrenaline rush of like, no, I do not want to disconnect myself from God. How do I get that on a daily basis? So we're starting today by answering question number 2. So remember we had those 4 questions that we started with. And this question is, what is the defining property of dormant love? So to answer that question, classic, we first need to clarify the verse. Adam's soul is God's candle. What does that mean, right? The soul of man is God's candle from Proverbs. This means that the souls of Israel, which are referred to as Adam, are compared to the flame of a candle, which by nature continuously flicker upwards. So, because Adam is in the Neshama Klali, he's a soul that comprises all the souls of Am Yisrael, so Adam is just referring to the Jewish people as a whole. So the soul of the Jewish people is the flame of God. And so just like a flame is constantly flickering upwards, so too our soul always wants to return to its source. So why is that flame continuously flickering? Like if you watch it, it doesn't need to be windy in the room. The flame is constantly shuckling, right? If you ever saw someone deep in prayer, they look just like a candle. They're shuckling. What is that? It's their soul shuckling back and forth. It's their soul swaying to get closer to their source. Because the fire's flame is naturally inclined to detach itself from the wick so as to connect with its root above in the core element of fire, which we're learning Kabbalistically, which is below the moon's orbit, meaning it actually wants to return to its source. So you might be asking yourself, isn't that going to put out the fire? Wait a second. If the candle wants to go back to its source, which is a higher reality, so it's trying to get off the wick, and therefore it's trying to extinguish itself. And so even though it's going to extinguish itself, it wants to be part of a greater unity. Even though its flame is not going to be going to be recognizable in its source, right? The same way that, if one flame in the sun isn't recognizable, just like in its source, it doesn't care. It isn't into the idea of individuality. It just wants to be bottled to its source. It just wants to be surrendered and given over to this greater unity. So the soul desires to return to its source, the source of life. Same way a person's higher soul power of neshama, as well as even the lower soul powers of nefesh and ruach, naturally yearn and desire to be separated from the body and to cleave to it. So to attach themselves with the soul's root and source in God, the giver of life, may he be blessed. Meaning this is the soul's natural tendency. That's why when we're praying, when we're connected, that shuckling motion happens, resembling that candle. The soul is always yearning to connect to its source, to the source of life. And the body is the wick, right? And so it doesn't just want to be in this physical world of physical pleasures. It wants to return to its source. That's the soul's desire. So now we're answering the question, what is the main property of dormant love? An intrinsic, super rational desire of the soul to leave the body and be united with its source in God, even though it would nullify its own identity, right? The soul is not interested in my own identity. I don't need nobody on my own person. It just wants to go into that deeper unity. Of course, we're going to explain in Chassidus the ultimate reality is to be a soul within the body, because it's only in the physical body that we can actually perform mitzvahs and have not just a revelation of godliness, but a deep, intimate essence connection. But right now, we're just appreciating the soul's natural yearning to go higher and cleave to its source. So this connects to what we said about Chachma, being the root of the dormant love. This desire isn't something logical. It transcends logic. It's the very nature of the soul. So when we say Chachma, wisdom, we're not talking about wisdom in a typical sense, we're talking about in terms of the soul power, Chachma, which is a state of expansiveness, of openness, of inquiry, of inquisitiveness, of koachma, the potential of what is. And so this isn't coming from a logical part of the soul, but it's not coming from an illogical part of the soul. It's coming from supra-rational. If you look at the 10 Sphirot, there's the faculties of intellect, then there's the emotions below it, and above the faculties of intellect is Keter, which is where faith, will, and pleasure come from. And so we're talking about wisdom as part of the intellectual faculties. This is above the emotions, right? So when we're saying that this is above logic, we're not saying that it's illogical, it's saying that it's something that transcends logic. It's beyond logic. That is the nature of this dormant love. If all souls are naturally drawn to God, why doesn't everyone yearn to do mitzvahs and distance themselves from sin? If this is the nature of my soul, then why don't I constantly feel this yearning to be absorbed in His absolute unity? Something I really like to always think about when learning Tanya is, what is the questions that the Alter Rebbe is answering? We learned together in the Alter Rebbe's introduction to Tanya that he's coming to answer real questions that he got countless times from his Hasidim, real soul-bearing questions. And so he organized in the Tanya system to answer really all the questions of life. And so these are some of the questions that I imagine that someone's asking that the Alter Rebbe is going to answer for us. Chachma is a window for the soul, allowing God's infinity to flow in. For it to continue throughout the psyche and have its impact, a proper vessel must be created. Yes, the blessed infinite light is flowing through the window the soul is flowing through Chachma, but that's just going to stay in my Chachma, just going to stay in that cognitive state of wisdom, unless I have the right vessel to actually allow it to affect my entire being and my actions in my life. To understand how to make yourself a container, right, to create that vessel for the blessed infinite light, which enters your soul through its window of Chachma, we first need to learn a fundamental principle. So let's dive into that. The forces of holiness are exclusively derived from Chachma, from the soul power of wisdom. Everything in the universe is so sacred must flow from Chachma. That is our principle here. And the Alter Rebbe is bringing two textual references. One, just one here. Chachma itself is referred to as supernal holiness in the Zohar. Okay, so in the Zohar, the idea of Chachma and Kedusha and holiness are just completely integrated. So anything that is flowing, the only way holiness is going to flow into our lives, flow into our being, flow into our existence, into our lower soul powers, is only going to be through the soul power of Chachma. And what is the special quality of Chachma that binds it to holiness? Like, what is so special about Chachma that holiness has to flow through with it? The sacred Zohar Kodesh calls it, what do we say? Supernal holiness, right? That's what it calls Chachma. Why? What is so special about Chachma? It is bittul to or ein sof. It is identityless. It is surrendered to godliness. It is a state of openness, not a state of, I need to figure everything out, I need to put everything in a box, and I need to be in control of my life because I don't feel safe. No, it is open expansiveness. Chachma is a state of completely given over. It's before we even, see something flying, before we even call it a bird. It just is. And then that state of just is in beingness and openness and expansiveness, that is a vessel within our being that can draw down that Orient Sof, that infinity, into the rest of ourselves. And so that is the special value of Chachma. So Chachma's openness allows it to have something far beyond it flow through it. So it's not really that Chachma is so great. It's because Chachma is so open, that's what makes it so great. Because it's so open, that allows it something greater than it, Orient Sof, God's infinity, to flow through it. This is why it's referred to as Koach. Power of what, right? Of ma, koach ma, the power of what? The power ability to say, what is this? An inquisitiveness, an openness to the unknown. The tendency to openness comes from when you empty the ego, because the ego is always so sure of itself. The ego is like, I need to know what it is, I need to label it, I need to put it in a box, it's bad, it's bad, it's bad, it's good, it's good, it's good. No, Chachma is in the state of, I don't need to know, there's a greater plan, there's something greater happening beyond here. So now that we appreciate what allows holiness to flow through Chachma, we will look at the opposite of holiness, which is Klipa. The tendency of Klipa is to say only, give me, give me, give me, right? That's from Proverbs. As Esau said to Jacob, his brother, feed me. Never want to give in return. So the one way to know if something's Klipa, if it's a one-way street of giving. Klipa just wants to take and take and take. And we even see, Water that's healthy is always flowing, meaning it receives water from one river or stream and it gives that water outwards. Water that doesn't have an ability to give water to another water source, it's dead water. It's stagnant. That's where the water becomes gross. Okay, so the ability to give is actually our ability to be alive and healthy. This self-serving mentality is caused by the feeling of ego and separateness from God. Therefore, the forces of Klippa are referred to as dead, because Chachma gives life. In the verse states, they die without Chachma. Meaning, if I'm not in that state of giving, right, even when we look at the Dead Sea does not have an output source. It takes in, but it does not give out. Those are not living waters, right? Nothing can live inside those waters. And so the state of Klippa, it's really death, because it's the opposite of life. It's not in a state of giving. It's not in a state of flow. So to summarize, Chachma equals feeling one source. Holiness, which equals holiness, right? It's open to really feeling its source. It's open to something greater than itself. Whereas Klippa means feeling disconnected, means I feel like my own independent identity. I feel like I don't owe anyone anything and I don't receive from anything. I'm just like my own being over here. I don't acknowledge that I'm receiving my life force from godliness. And that equals death, because to be connected to the Makar Chaim, the source of life, that's life. So to not have that revealed connection, we're saying that's death. So now we're getting into the juicy stuff. What causes a person to sin? The spirit of delusion causes a person to think, I can do this sin, and I'm still going to be connected to God. God and I, we're tight. Oh my God, I could do this. I have lots of love in my love tank with God. We're fine, And so that's the spirit of delusion. Because imagine, okay, to put it into extreme, a spouse thinking about the other spouse, yeah, I could just cheat this once and we're good. We've been married for so long. We're fine. You see how delusional that is. Or I know that this is critical, but it's not really going to hurt my relationship with my student because we're good, We actually are in real relationships and we actually have the power to damage a relationship. And that shows us the power of the relationship. It's real. And our relationship with God is real. We actually affect God. We can actually make God feel loved by us, and we can actually hurt God, right? Hashem gave us 248 ways to love him, 248 love languages. This is 248 positive commandments, and 365 ways that God says, ouch, that hurts. No, that hurts me. Meaning God actually put himself in a vulnerable relationship with us. And so the spirit of delusion comes and says, it's not really such a real relationship. I can do this and we're still going to be good. So why would that same person choose to die rather than convert? What happens all of a sudden? Why doesn't the spirit of delusion just come there and be like, yeah, okay, so you'll just convert, but it's not really real. It's going to be fine. What happened to that voice? So what happens is that red line gets crossed, where that spirit of delusion is washed away by that soul power of Chachma, of that dormant love in our soul that says, no, this is crossing a red line, buddy. If I do this, I'm actually giving up my soul. I'm converting, right? And so when a person does that, reaches that point of that decision, that clarity, that sobriety of wait a second, where's God's red line comes in. In which case I'm able to actually have that sober moment, and therefore that's why people could choose die over convert, because that spirit of delusion has been washed away. But isn't every single sin separating me from God? So really, what's the difference? And the answer is yes. The spirit of delusion, the spirit of folly, the Ruach Shas, it sets an arbitrary red line, meaning God set his red line like this. 248 positive mitzvahs connect us. Those 365 sins, they disconnect us. And every single time we do that, we're disconnecting our soul from God. And yeah, it sounds extreme because it is, right? It's a real relationship where we can actually heal the relationship and we can actually hurt the relationship, right? If I believe I have the ability to hurt, believe I have the ability to heal. And so what happens is that we kind of it's just human. We all, this is just we have to know what this voice sounds like within ourselves, because within us it's going to sound different. But you could be like, yeah, I would never break Shabbos. That's a red line. But speaking Lashon Hara this once, it's not such a big deal, Or okay, just to criticize this person this once, it's not such a big deal. Or, I'm just going to embarrass this person a second, but I would never embarrass them in front of a larger group. What's the difference? You know what I mean? Who set that arbitrary red line? We do. That's the spirit of delusion, setting the red line. And so really what we're going to be able to appreciate is that I realize that the red line is any sin. The red line is not convert or die, right? That's just the point where it's so sobering. The soul is in such a place of almost annihilation that I have to wake up to the truth. But what we want to be able to do is realize the Achdus Havaya, realize God's true unity, and therefore realize that I can have this spiritual adrenaline rush, but just by really saying that any sin is going to disconnect me from God. And I want to be connected to God. I want to have life, right? We said klipa is death and kedusha is life. I want to be plugged in 24/7 to the true source of life. I want this intimate connection with my source. I'm that flame flickering and I want to be connected, and anything else is dysfunctional. Anything else hurts me. And so what we're going to be doing soon, we're going to be exploring God's unity. And through exploring God's unity, we're going to realize how any act of separating myself from God's unity is actually the same as a convert or die situation. So we're going to be learning how to channel that spiritual adrenaline for any everyday situation. So right now, we're just going to be starting to be aware of, what does that spirit of delusion sound like inside of me? How do I justify to myself how this sin is different from that sin? How do I justify, this one's okay? Okay, thank you.